Well, I agree. It is a funny story. One that you can see clearly is an old story. It's not one from a, I guess, modern day sort of context. And I wanted to read. I asked Anne particularly to read from verse 1, even though the story the lectionary has is just the last part, just the wrestling passage. But you don't really get the context of the wrestling passage without understanding how afraid he is of this meeting with Esau. And you get that so clearly when you see this comical passage of how he's devised and tries to arrange this meeting with Esau. Because you remember, he ran away in fear for his life because Esau was going to kill him. Because he'd done him out of his birthright, done him out of his dad's blessing. And so he sends some messengers back to meet Esau and to go into the homeland and see if all's quiet, if everything's safe. And his messengers come back to him, and far from saying all's quiet, everybody's waiting for you, or whatever they might say, they come back and go, guess what? Your brother's coming out to meet you. He's not going to wait there at home. He's actually on the way. Now that he knows where you are, he's coming. And he's coming with 400 men. Now that doesn't look good. If the last time you saw your brother, he was going to kill you. And now you find, now that he knows where you are, he's coming to meet you with 400 men. So you can understand that Jacob is afraid. I think it's distressed. And he's a worried man. So he busts up his camp, and you start to realise, in the 10 years that he's been working for Laban, the prosperity that God has blessed him with. And you remember, you've got to hear in the background that God promised him, I will bless you and I will make of you a great nation. And the fulfilment of that promise has already begun. He's coming back with 12 kids. Notice it just text says 11 sons, because that's the 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. But there is already a 12th, but she's a girl. So I'm sorry to say, in their eyes, she just didn't count. That's not me talking. That's just the way the scripture's written. They just ignore the girl, sad as that is. But these guys become the 12 tribes of Israel. And we have the first 11 down to Joseph. He's the promised one that God's been waiting for. And so God tells Jacob, now it's time for you to go back home. Clearly this place is not going to be your home. This wrestling that you've done with Laban, this is not your home here. Always constantly fighting and in conflict with him. You are to go back to your home. The land that I've promised is going to be a blessing for you. So he's on his way. And so he's holding these two things, that God has directed him to go home. And God has told him and already begun to bless him massively. Yet as he goes back, as he's on his way, he has the fear of his brother who's out to kill him. And it looks like he's still out to kill him. And so he sends the parties on in batches, herds of 50 with a few shepherds. I don't know how many shepherds you'd have with a herd of 50. But he sends them on saying, oh, they're a present for you. And I don't know if any of you have read the book The Hobbit or seen the movie of The Hobbit. There's this really comical passage when Gandalf and Bilbo introduce all of their 12 tribe to Beorn, who's this angry bear of a man, and who's very quiet, and he doesn't like visitors at all, and he definitely does not like dwarves. Now 12 of their company are dwarves, and so what Gandalf does is says, well, Bilbo, you and I go first, and we'll just casually slip into congregation that, our party is looking for shelter. And he says, well, you can hardly call two a party. And they say, oh, well, there's a couple of dwarves. And he says, well, where are they? And he calls the first two dwarves out. And then he slips into conversation, that there's many of us. He says, well, you can't call 4 many. And he says, oh, well, there's actually a few more. And he brings out 2 more. And there's, several passages. He slips into conversation that there's a great company. And he brings out more and more and more so as to not scare him. But it's hilarious as you read it and you watch it and you realise how farcical it is to keep going with the same gag over and over. And that's exactly what Jacob does here. I think that's where Gandalf got it from. And so what happens is that he sends these presents, wave after wave, of shepherds saying, oh, these 50 bulls, these 50 sheep, these 50 ewes, these 50 cows, they're all for you, they're all for you. It's a present. Hoping that all these presents, you can imagine, Esau with his 400 men marching along, going, right, he's sort of over the hills and in the next valley. Oh, there's a shepherd with a herd here. Whose are you? Oh, your servant Jacob, and these are a gift for you. And by the way, he's right behind us. And then what's right behind them? No, not Jacob, but another herd. Some more shepherds, another herd, more shepherds. That's what's happening here. In any case, this goes on. But we don't get to that story now. We have to wait for next week. So if you want to hear about what happens there, you either have to do homework or you have to come back next week. But so this little story that we have is framed with this meeting of Esau and the massive lead-up that we've just heard. And then next week's passage is when he actually gets there. But in between, sandwiched as if to highlight and give the importance, is Jacob wrestling with God. This encounter that he has. He sends everybody out in front of him, maybe as a buffer, maybe because he's trying to be fair or something, I'm not sure. Distance himself between the families and him. In any case, he separates himself in such a way that if any trouble comes, there's no one there to help him, no one to hear him call out. And it does come. He's attacked. A midnight attack. Somebody jumps on him and wrestles him to the ground, and it's only afterwards that he realises this is God. But he wrestles with this person all night. And neither one seems to be winning. So the man, this God figure, strikes him on the hip and puts his hip out of joint. Which you'd think, there's a power move of some description. But it doesn't change anything in essence. Jacob does not let go. And God does not then get some massive advantage, still can't get away. And the man realises that dawn is approaching. So he says, let me go before the dawn comes. And Jacob says, not until you bless me. I won't let you go. And so God gives him this blessing, and he says, not all of the other kind of blessings that we've seen. There's a different kind of a gift altogether. He says, no longer will you be called grabber, but you will be called the one who wrestles with God, the one who struggles with God. And so you might ask this question, who is it that Jacob is wrestling with? He's anxious, he's stressed, he's afraid, he's about to meet his brother who he has cheated out of everything that was deservedly his. One could imagine he thinks the man who grabs him in the night and attacks him is probably Esau. He could be thinking, or we could be reading in some commentaries, or thinking, well, this is Jacob wrestling with himself, wrestling with his conscience, or the things that he's done in the light of meeting Esau again. It could be his fear and his anxiety that he's wrestling with. but it also could be God. Both Jacob and the one who assaults him say that he has been wrestling with God. And Jacob says, as he reflects on what has just happened, I have seen God face to face, and I have lived. My life has been spared. Some might even suggest that this is only an inner struggle with God. But as you look at the story, what you find is that there's this, story writing technique. There's a stress placed on the physicality of this encounter. When the assailant strikes Jacob's hip, he's physically affected. His hip is put out and he walks with a limp for, I'm not sure if it's the rest of his life, but certainly we have this wonderful image of him hobbling off with the sun rising behind him, or maybe in front of him, I don't know. He's hobbling off and the sun is rising, and he's still limping because of this encounter. It makes it very grounded. This is a very real encounter. This is no dark night of the soul that he's just feeling fearful and that's what's grabbed him. There's no reference in the story to him falling asleep and having a very vivid dream. And even the comment that about the dietary restrictions, that, and this is why to this day the Jewish people don't eat this little tendon, which never occurs in any of their food regulations or anything like that. So it's a very odd thing to include. But what it does do is tells us that this is a very real story. It's a very physical encounter. It's not just his mind. It's not just something he's worried about. He has physically encountered God and he's physically affected thereafter. But why does God wrestle with Jacob? Why does the God who says, Jacob, you need to go home and there you will find prosperity and there I will bless you, take all the families and the wives and the herds and all, and go back to your land? Why does God, having told him to go back and promised him all of this stuff, why would he then attack him on the way? What purpose is there? Now, some would suggest that this is somehow a disciplinary action, that he's trying to impress upon Jacob that, all your stealing, lying, deception type of behaviour isn't appropriate and you won't get away with it. Well, there's nothing of that in the text. Absolutely nothing. There's some suggestions that maybe this should be a message to him that you can't achieve it on your own, that you won't fulfill the promises with your own tactics and with all of these, plotting and putting everybody out and sending the gifts before you. None of that matters. Rely on God. Your craftiness won't win the day. But again, there's no evidence. God never says, oh, by the way, stop being crafty. God never says, you've been a trickster all your life and you tricked your brother and now you're going to cop it. None of that is in this story. And in fact, it's almost the reverse, where God says to him, you used to be grabber, but now you're the struggler. He actually commends him for this part of him that is a wrestler who will not let go. That's part of his identity. You just never give up. But what this is a challenge. A very physical challenge. God comes to him in human form and wrestles with him in a way that says, let's see what this guy is really like when the going gets tough. It has a similar feel to the testing of Abraham. You remember when God says to Abraham, I want you to offer me your one and only son, the one whom all the promise is wrapped up in, the one that everything hangs on. What if I asked you to even let go of him? It has that kind of a testing sort of a nature about it, doesn't it? Will you be faithful to me even when the going gets tough? Is the question God seems to be asking Jacob here in this wrestling. And you might also be saying further to that, well, how is it that this seems like such a contest? You know, how does Jacob actually able to compete against God in a wrestling fight? That sort of doesn't make sense. Well, the text doesn't talk about God coming in the fullness of his glory, does it? It talks about a man attacks him and wrestles with him. We have this sense that, well, we know it's God, we've worked that out, but it's a very human form. God has come right down to Jacob's level. You know, theologically perhaps as well as physically, God reaches down to where Jacob is in order to encounter him, in order to challenge this relationship, to build this relationship. He's very real and he's very human for Jacob in this moment. There's no suggestion in the passage at all that at any given time God could just overwhelm him. God could have just snapped his fingers and gone, well, there you go, take that. And there's no suggestion in that God is playing some kind of a game, that this is somehow a trick or it's only pretend for God. You know, you might be struggling away with all you might, but I'm only pretending to struggle. There's no suggestion that God plays games with Jacob. I find that kind of comforting. I don't know about you. To think that God doesn't mess with us from his position on high. He genuinely encounters us where we're at. I like that. And then in the very end, with, the toing and froing, the grabbing and the throwing out of his hip socket, God can't just overwhelm Jacob. But Jacob can't seem to win either. And this notion of, you need to let me go because the dawn is coming. It's not because somehow God is, like Dracula and will be, turned to stone if he sees the sun. The understanding being it's actually protection for Jacob. With this notion, and Jacob actually mentions, that if you see the face of God, you would die. That would be the end of you. It's God protecting Jacob, saying, well, the dawn's coming, and if we keep wrestling, you will see the face of God and you will die. So you better let me go. And when Jacob says to God, what is your name? There's this wonderful part where, an element, I guess, of this story where he asks God for his name. And God doesn't give him a name. And in fact, God answers his question with another question. God seemingly does not want to be fully revealed to Jacob, though he's blessed him. And Jacob got something. Jacob has prevailed in a sense. God has not really lost either, because he still remains himself enough to say, well, I'm not going to reveal all of myself to you. You don't get to have my name today. And that's the end of the story. It just cuts it off there. And it made me think about how my own wrestling with God is often when God is not fully revealed. My own times of wrestling with God is when I don't see the whole picture of what God might be doing. That's when I struggle the most with God. That's when I wrestle the most. When things don't make sense and they're not clear, God is not fully revealed to me, and his plan still has blurry edges, or the details are not hammered out. That's when I find myself struggling with God. And sometimes the struggle is to hold on to those promises. You know, the cloudiness of it, the mystery of it, that God isn't fully revealed or his plan isn't fully revealed, tests my resolve. Will I hold on to this promise, not knowing, not seeing, not understanding? Can I be like that? What can we learn from this weird and wonderful story of Jacob wrestling with God? Is that God takes the initiative here. This is not a sermon where you should all go out and be like Jacob and pick a fight with God and start to wrestle with God over something. That's not the message. God challenges Jacob. God comes in and challenges. It's not the other way round. This is not our initiative, but God challenges. God comes to him. The issue is, how will Jacob, Israel, respond to God's initiative? What will he be? Who will he be, if you like? When the rubber hits the road, will he be the one who grabs onto God and will not let go of those promises? Will he be the one who has an unshakable faith? Doesn't matter how much you fling him about, he's just going to keep clinging on to God for grim death. That's what we see happening here. And we know that, and there's this passage really foreshadows the meeting with Esau, that he's in fear and trepidation about. But in a sense, he's been able to say, well, I wouldn't let go of God who fought me, so I can face my brother with even more confidence. He was willing, if you like, to risk dying to hold on to God, to receive that blessing. And we see him continue that next week. He's willing to risk his life and still go and meet his brother. How do we respond to God when the going gets tough? Are we passive? Do we just lie there and go, oh, and give up? Or just let it all happen around us? Do we hang on? Do we claim those promises? Do we cling to those promises and his word? Do we persist in the relationship with God? Because God honours our relationship by engaging deeply and persisting in the struggle with us. No matter what we do, no matter how many times we mess up, God engages, God persists, God is faithful, God is gracious and forgiving, always, and never runs away and never lets go and never turns his back or never says it's too hard, this one's a waste. Are we going to be like that in our relationship to God? So the good news is, all that God does for us, that is the nature of God in his relationship with us. The one who clings onto us and will not let us go. Will not let us go. Could we claim that identity for ourselves? That we would hold on to God and never let